Good evening. I'm still in shock that I'm about to introduce the person I'm about to introduce, because when I reached out to our guest this evening a couple months ago, I had a very little hope that he can make it, and he did. Mr. Jim Clancy. Jim has been a journalist for his entire life. He started in the 1970s. He joined CNN in 1981 and stayed with the network until 2015 for 34 years, becoming one of the most recognizable and prominent voices and faces of the network. He covered pretty much every big story in the world you can think of during last 4 decades, including the collapse of communism in former Czechoslovakia, Velvet Revolution in 1989. He was based, besides Atlanta, he was based in Beirut, Frankfurt, Rome, and London, but he was a roaming journalist, he was a roaming correspondent covering the entire world. He's a recipient of many global, the best journalistic awards. Jim, for me and for many of his fans, is an epitome of a television journalist. I'm very happy he came. He only landed yesterday morning. He came straight from Atlanta yesterday morning. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you very, very much, Tomáš. Good to be here with you. It's great to be back in the Czech Republic. And I have many great memories here of the Velvet Revolution and the entire collapse of communism, and the years before that and the years after that, and watching Europe really mature. And it's been quite a run from Africa, Latin America, Asia, the Middle East especially for me. And I'll just share a lot of my ideas, my thoughts with you today. And I really look forward to getting some of your questions, because I find that's always about the most interesting part of any kind of interaction, especially with young people, especially with young journalists and others.
Jim is you're a person you can probably say, I've seen it all. I've been there, done that. I've seen it all. Me personally, I've been working with the CNN network for 19 years and also seen a lot of things. And I've been whole life, even during my lifetime in communism, I've been an optimist. However, what's happening in the world today, be it United States, be it Far East, be it Middle East, be it Europe, is worrying me. I had a feeling, and I'm not the only one, that the world is heading in some very, very wrong direction. I'm not sure if it is the same direction as it was in 1930s. But what's happening? I mean, how do you see what the upheaval or the mess in the world today?
A lot of people, Tomáš, ask the question, where are we? Well, you put it in Star Wars terms, we're in Chapter 5. The Empire strikes back. And the revolutionary forces of the world are in full retreat, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in Europe. There's an increasing threat from authoritarianism. And, we only need to look to President Trump and the way that he turned to President Erdogan of Turkey and his respect for al-Sisi in Egypt. He's got respect for the authoritarians. And, between Egypt and Turkey, they're in a race to see how many journalists, not only that they can imprison, but imprison without charges, imprison without a trial. So we're in a dangerous spot, at least one from my perspective. And what's going to change all of that? Well, we are. The voices not just of journalists, but the voices of young people that want to decide and determine their own futures and how they want this world to go.
Are you worried about the future of the United States, of Europe at the moment?
To steal a line, Dan Rather went to the opening of the Lyndon Baines Johnson Library, and he had a line that I always loved, and it was, I've seen ropings and I've seen shootings, but I ain't never seen nothing like this. It's a spectacle unfolding in front of our eyes, and we can't believe it. We really can't. Americans are looking at it. Is it treason? When they go back and they look at what Donald Trump did in Helsinki in meeting with President Putin, and then the way that you know, in the words of one Russian commentator, you know, was this the point in the press conference when Trump began the boot licking of Putin's shoes? Is this when it began? And Americans are stunned. And then this week, to have him say, well, now I'm going to invite Putin back for a second summit in Washington. And the Russians reply that, well, yes, we're open to that. You know, if they're discussing this all through the U.S. news media right now, you know, and to be honest, we don't have a clue what Trump and Putin talked about in Helsinki. The Russians allude to some kind of a security arrangement, an international security verbal agreement that was reached. What is it? What does it have to do with? We don't know. And this is unprecedented. He faced unrelenting criticism, some of it even from his own Republican Party. But the GOP hasn't been that forceful. If this was Obama that had done that, there would be howls for his impeachment right on the spot, coming from various corners. Trump is trying to avoid it all by changing the subject once again, saying, well, wait a minute, because if I can't tell you what we got out of that summit, I'm going to tell you we're going to get a really great summit. He's going to come here. We're going to do it all over again. And people are just shaking their heads. How can he get away with this? How is it possible that he can do this in America?
Well, how could he been elected to start with? How did we get to Trump? I mean, what, you know, like there were these years of Obama, 8 years of Obama, which I consider one of the most successful years in U.S. history when it comes to presidency. Not everything was fulfilled as what it's impossible, but, you know, when Obama was elected in 2008, he inherited 2 wars. There is a satirical newspaper called The Onion, and when Obama was elected, they ran a headline, "The worst job in the world given to American black men." But there was quite a hope after that. How did we get from Obama to Trump?
Well, there was that economic crisis, too. He was handed that as well. He tried to unravel those 2 wars with some success, but no victories, certainly. And people are talking today about Afghanistan. There's no victory waiting for us in Afghanistan. If the United States could stay there another 20 years, 30 years, the outcome will be the same. The Taliban will outweight you. Because when you go to Afghanistan, you don't travel 10,000 miles. You travel back more than 100 years. That's where the country is. And you don't change that overnight. You don't change that with social workers and even military troops. Now, how did it all happen? How did Trump get into power?
I want to follow up on this, also a little bit, just to remind the Trump campaign. I mean, Trump campaign was based on lies. I don't know what the percentage of it is, but it was based on lies, based on misinformation. He attacked pretty much everybody. He attacked handicapped people. He attacked women, grabbed them by the pussy. This all was coming out during his campaign. I mean, how is it possible that a person like that actually get elected in a society
and this is what's scary, because when he started precisely at the place that so many demagogues start, and that was blaming the immigrants, blaming the people of color within a society. He convinced the American people that they faced a great threat, and he was going to build a wall and make Mexico pay for it. But in fact, the amount of immigration coming across the southern border of the United States was already in decline. It had already sharply declined. When he talked about the crime that was being committed by these immigrants, much like they talk about it here in Europe today. When he talked about the crime, the fact of the matter is that all of those counties that are bordering America's southern borders have a lower crime rate than the national average. So quite the opposite was true. The numbers were declining. There have been asylum seekers. The immigration questions are there, and they are legitimate, and the U.S. has no policy, just like the U.S. has no health care. You know, one of his other battle cries was that Obamacare had to go, and he was going to replace it with something that was much better, and it was going to be cheaper, and only he could deliver it. And today, Americans can ask themselves, what has he delivered? And the answer is nothing. He's further destroyed Obamacare, healthcare in the U.S. independently bought in the market exchanges. is becoming more and more expensive. They were lies.
Well, he got elected. That's one thing. But we discussed it just before this panel that any other president, imagine that what came up on Trump during the election would come up on Hillary Clinton, for example. She would be gone. I mean, they would never had any chance. But I think also if half of the scandals Trump is going through, including having sexual affairs with a porn star, having pedophiles in his advisor body, convicted pedophiles in the Czech Republic, by the way. How can he be surviving this? Honestly, I don't understand. I thought this is a civil society. I thought this is a democracy, and I thought that there are some rules, that there is a constitution which sets some rules. How is this possible, his survival so far?
It's got nothing to do with those things, because actually Trump has some successes that he can point to. Immigration is further down because they have, stripped families of their children. So people don't even want to come in and apply for asylum. And Trump can say, I was a success. Look, I'm making it go down. But he still wants to build the wall, which is, they're talking about giving him $5 billion. It's going to cost $25 billion. Needless, it's just not needed. Another thing that he's delivered on has been taxes. He's cut taxes, yes, but here's where it's important. He's cut taxes at the very highest income levels. And now the richest people in America, the donors to the GOP, to the Republican Party and Donald Trump, are able to buy what they want with the money that they saved on taxes. And that's the deal that he's made. Yes, Americans got lower taxes, but those aren't protected like they are for the 1% up there at the top. Average Americans will gradually see their tax rate going up. And already we hear that they're going to have to take away some of the entitlements, meaning Social Security, meaning welfare, meaning Medicare and Medicaid. They're going to have to take away these things to pay for the tax cuts. He increased the military budget, which was a very popular thing to do. He increased it by some $88 billion. Already, the Pentagon estimate said there was $120 billion missing. In other words, better accounting for the money that we had already spent would have saved America more money than Trump pledged in additional funding. So there's all kinds of things that are coming around, and Trump can say, hey, I've been successful in doing this. Taxes are one, the number of people applying for asylum are another. I live in a red state, all right? Everybody that supported Trump, many of them are sticking by him. Perhaps women are the one group that are abandoning him.
So who are the people who are sticking by him? Who is his electorate?
They are people that believe that the white people have a special place in America that is reserved for them, and more brown people mean less rights for the people of their color. They don't want to admit that they made a mistake on taxes. They don't want to admit that they made a mistake on health care or the environment. The environment is another area where companies are being allowed to come in and dictate what rules, what laws they want to have rolled back so that whether they're coal miners or whatever they are, they can pollute without paying penalties. And it's this kind of special treatment, it's this transactional relationship between Trump supporters, his rich donors, and this presidency that has made a difference.
United States has made tremendous mistakes in a history. I'm not going to list them here. But whenever there was a crisis in the world, even like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, during the Balkan Wars, during the world looked up to America as some sort of moral leader, to some sort of law leader in the world, not necessarily as a world cop. Do you think but I think that what's happening in the United States right now is damaging the reputation of the United States, and I can hear it all over the world. Do you think United States can survive Trump?
Yes, I do. I believe that the institutions are stronger than the man. Look, Donald Trump, let me say this positively about the man. Donald Trump has done more for journalism than anyone in my lifetime. Because people suddenly see the need. Somebody around here has to fact check this man. Somebody around here has to tell the truth. And I think there's been an awakening among journalists as well, that for too many years we allowed personal opinions to win their merry little way into our stories. And we need to have more fact-based journalism, depending on data, depending on solid interviews where the sources are revealed, and our own observations. In other words, those core pillars of investigative journalism. I think that the journalistic community has come awake, if you will, in the Trump era. And look, the New York Times, the Washington Post, record numbers of subscriptions. People have come to accept, my God, we need somebody to tell us the facts, because we're not going to be getting it from this administration. In fact, they don't really believe whether it's going to be the Democrats or the Republicans. They've lost trust in the politicians themselves, and they want somebody to do something about it, and I think it's going to really be a golden age for journalism. And we'll see if journalism can help turn back some of these things. But I do think that we have the institutions, including the Justice Department, and as people will say, it's Mueller time. Mueller is playing his hand very well, very close to his chest. But this is what Trump fears. And you wonder, well, why is he just obsessed with this? Because it will unmask Trump, not necessarily for collusion. I'll get more on that with you later with the Russians. But for who he is and how he got there, how he has lied, how he has cheated. I think if he really goes down for anything and doesn't pardon himself for it, it's probably going to be money laundering. All of these relationships, of course, we still haven't seen the tax returns, but Mueller has. Mueller knows everything. And apparently, so does Vladimir Putin.
We mentioned that, one of the pillars of Trump electoral campaign was immigration and this hatred rhetoric against what you call brown people. But he's not the only one. If you look at Europe, if you look at Brexit, if you look at other populists in Europe, including the Czech government, they all used migration. They all used fear of migrants, blaming them, calling them criminals, calling them terrorists. What's happening in the world? I mean, why is this shift towards? Is it populism? Is it fascism? Why is that hatred? Like Czech Republic, people in the Czech Republic elected a president who is extremely anti-immigrant. He is extremely pro-Russian. He is extremely pro-Chinese. And I don't know what they are complaining about, because the Czechs has never had better lives before. Is it part of the problem that people are simply? They are just too spoiled. They have good lives. They have good jobs. They have the salaries are rising. Where is that coming from? That populism and that why is immigration such a powerful tool for these populists or for these sort of politicians?
Well, let me just ask the audience here: how many people think that attempts at asylum seeking or immigration are about the same as they were in 2016? How many think they've gone up? No, in all of Europe, like cross-Mediterranean immigration. It's down, right? Do you know by how much? 94%. In other words, as the real threat, and some people believe there is a real threat, diminishes, you hear more populists coming out trying to, and I call this the Department of Fear. They try to make people afraid. And this didn't start in the last 5 years. This has been going on literally for decades. And I remember Johnny Agnelli, the Italian automaker, had what he called the Agnelli Foundation. And they saw this tremendous push-pull. As population rates were declining in Europe, they were increasing all across North Africa. And they were going to need to bring in workers in order to, do the factory jobs. Or Johnny Agnelli suggested that instead of changing the fabric of Europe and the allegiance to Christianity and the cultures that were embedded in Europe, this quilt of different cultures, to keep them basically intact, you had to move the factories to North Africa. It never gained much traction. Today, Donald Trump is the same. He wants to keep all the jobs in the United States, but keep all of the workers south of the border. I mean, and it doesn't make sense. If you're concerned about the fabric of Europe or the culture of the United States, although I think that's a stretch, the culture of the United States, because we don't, you know, we're a mix of everybody. A majority of people in the United States, if not the vast majority, are themselves immigrants or the descendants of immigrants.
You know, but the thing is, I mean, Europe needs immigration. I mean, Europe is aging rapidly, and without replenishment of workers, of people, you know, Europe will disappear. You know, Russia has the same problem. They need immigration, so...
But nobody wants to go to Russia. Have you noticed? That's Vladimir Putin can talk about this all he wants, because nobody wants to go to Russia.
That's
Well,
a different
Julian
story,
Assange.
I agree. So, you know, you're talking about Europe, you know, how much danger of, you know, for Europe Trump actually is, you know, like by trying to divide Europe in a sense, you know, like if you see what just happened, not just in Helsinki, but before that, he attacked Angela Merkel, he attacked British Prime Minister, he attacked French President, he attacked pretty much everybody, insulted everybody.
He attacked the Canadians. You know, he attacked our closest allies who, after 9/11, stood with us and sacrificed their sons and daughters on the altar of this idea that we have a collective freedom and that we are the collective West and that we depend on allies. And he trashed it all and pretended that he was successful in getting more money out of the Europeans. Yes, the Europeans needed to increase their defense spending to keep NATO whole and to face the threat posed by Russia or others. But the way that Trump did it divided people. It was already agreed they were going to increase it. Has it accelerated that increase? Possibly. But the increase in spending isn't worth that sense of unity that says, you know, I will stand with you. If you come under a threat, I will stand with you. And he's even questioned that. Now, there's no policy goal in Vladimir Putin's mind more important than trying to win disunity among the members of the NATO alliance.
And it's working. I mean...
Well, it's working in one way. In another way, with the trade war, which is another place where Americans may lose their faith in Donald Trump when they start losing their jobs. Today, he threatened the entirety of Chinese imports into the United States, or exports to the United States, I should say. $505 billion worth of them. The Chinese are now cutting their own deals. You know, as Trump says, make America great again. Others say that means my attorney got arrested. But it's America, go it alone. And the Europeans and the Chinese are going to be cutting deals. Asian states are going to cut deals. The United States is going to be left out of them. Can it be unwound? We don't know.
You know, you covered Europe in 1989. You covered that euphoria of collapse of communism. You covered Europe coming together, European Union increasing. How serious is this threat right now to the integrity of Europe, of European Union?
Again, I'm a bit optimistic because I think that most of you see this as a Trump problem. It's not America so much as it is one man, Donald Trump, the way he got elected and the way that he maintains his presence in power. And a lot of the blame, you know, I've never really believed that Russian collusion, if there was any, I mean, we know that Russia asked him to release, we know that Trump asked Russia to release more of Hillary's emails to embarrass her and the Democrats. So, I mean, there was collusion on that level, but did that change the outcome of the election? I don't think so. What changed the outcome of the election was the way that the mainstream media covered Donald Trump, giving him billions of dollars in free airtime, excluding other Republican candidates, excluding the Democratic voices. They covered Hillary Clinton, but usually within the context of her emails. And I don't want to relive the election over again, but what's relevant today is that the mainstream media is doing the same thing in the United States. They're feeding Trump nonstop, 24 hours a day. It's all about Trump. Why are they doing that? Because it's good for the ratings. I go back to what CBS said during the campaign when they were making millions, hundreds of millions of dollars off of Trump's candidacy because people couldn't believe it. They were watching their TV screens. And Les Moonves said, I don't know if it's good for America, but it's damn good for CBS. They're doing the same thing today, where they make money out of Trump, knowing well that it's damned bad for the United States of America. There's a lack of responsibility, and until and unless that changes, you know, we could be stuck with not only Trump, but others like him. There's other people that are already running for different offices around the country that are imitating his style. So that is worrisome.
But they are parts of America when it's working very efficiently, very well, but also parts of Europe. I mean, if you would look at the rhetorics of Trump, of Nigel Farage, of May, of Czech President Zeman, there is a lot of similarities. If you look at the composure of the electorate, it's always everywhere the same: educated against uneducated, countryside against the cities, well-off against the poor. I think it's everywhere the same. I mean, it's very similar electorate, so it's happening all over the world.
But how do we look at solving those problems? Do we look at them by scapegoating one part of our communities? Do we look at it by empowering the wealthiest among us so that they will encourage us with their donations to make sure that we get reelected? Or will they sit down and they try to sort this out and figure out what are the human problems that are involved here? We've already learned that not everybody is an economic migrant. Many of the people that are trying to come to Europe from Africa are leaving because there's no possibility of freedom in their own country. And they want more than money. They want freedom. They want freedom to live their lives. But are the people who support that concept going to stand up for it and going to stand against the authoritarians, the demagogues who get up and try to pull this in electoral politics, no matter where it is in the world? It's up to us.
Yep. Do you see European Union still in existence as you know it in 10 years? EU, European Union. Do you think it will survive this sort of, political changes?
I don't want to make exact predictions, but I think the European Union was a great idea, and I think the European Union should survive. I think that if there are enough like-minded people, that it will survive. I think Brexit was an error. I think that Brexit is going to end up costing, especially Britain's young people, end up costing them their futures. In many, many ways, they will be less well off 10, 20 years from now than had Britain remained in the European Union, whereas a number of countries, you could come together, you could go to different places and work, you could be part of something bigger than these small nations, and that is the EU.
But there are indications that if there will be similar referendums held in other EU countries, including the Czech Republic, that they would also tend to leave European Union. They, the Czech politicians, but it's a very similar rhetoric to UK politicians, anti-EU politicians. They call Brussels new communism. They call the EU new communism. They called Brussels, a center of who dictates what other countries, European countries, to do. That it's destroying nationalities, or the nation states, and what do you? It's a danger. I'm actually worried about this because as there were some researches done, and the Czech Republic young people also would probably vote for exit. How can it survive this sort of onslaught on these EU values which EU was building with?
Well, you don't have as long a process as the United States of America, but in essence, it's the same thing. And I mean, essentially, American states leave it to the football teams to do the competition, and berating one another. And they skip past all of these political issues. I can still be proud that I'm from one state or another in the United States and be supportive of that state. But at the same time, it's not even a concept for me to think of breaking away. The Texans, every once in a while, you hear it coming from there. But, that's about the only place in the United States that it's even seriously discussed. And I wonder, it's just a maturation process. Can it get through this trouble spot, this bump in the road? Are the institutions strong enough? And here perhaps is where Europe, comes under fire from the people of Europe, and that is Brussels. I mean, Brussels is seen as this massive bureaucracy that so many others around Europe, they just can't believe that it represents them. Well, in the United States, we feel that way about the U.S. Congress. I mean, we just feel that it just doesn't represent the people or their needs. And somehow, some way, we have to take it back. I think the issues are different for Europe and the United States. In the United States, it's that money now controls politics. And until and unless we get money out of politics and make the news media fairly distribute all the airtime for free, by the way, because having a media license in the United States is literally a license to print money. Technology is going to change for the United States as everything goes to the internet. But we'll see. I mean, we'll have some storms to weather as well. I think that for the European Union, you're absolutely right, Tomasz. The next decade is a very, very important one, and I would recommend for everybody, from the experience that I have over the past decades, is to hold it together and hold on as best you can as you hold your politicians who represent you accountable.
Would you agree with the assessment that, of course, I don't think any European country would benefit of the collapse of European Union. Who would benefit would be Russia and China, which are already using this, this division within EU to kind of to infiltrate, to put their businesses in, to put their influence, to increase their influence in the region. Would you agree with that?
Well, I have to agree with it, especially on the Russian front. The Chinese are taking economic advantage, as you can see. I mean, first Beijing offers Sri Lanka, or some other small country a loan to rebuild their port. And then when they can't repay the loan, they just take over the port. Now, you look at the Russians have just fought a complete war in Syria, backing Bashar al-Assad for what? For that port on the Mediterranean. That's what for. And China is looking to do some of the same things.
Talking about the Middle East, we've covered together war in Baghdad in 2003, and then it looked bad. I remember our producer Ingrid Formanek in 2003 used the word, forgive my language, used the saying clusterfuck, that the situation in Iraq is absolutely horrendous. What happened since then? It's much more catastrophic. We are witnessing implosion in the Middle East. What are the danger of the situation there? For a lot of people who have never been to Libya, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Egypt, it may be so what, but what are the dangers of the implosion, further implosion and further destabilization of Middle East?
Well, what we have is a situation where it is chaos. Iraq has not recovered at all. The fight still goes on there. Bashar al-Assad has really gained control in Syria. It's said to be winding down, but if you look at it, there's still civilian casualties every day. Many of them against civilians who are being held in prison. So that situation in Syria continues to wind down, but you have tremendous population shifts as places like Daraa in the south, close to Jordan, are really being evacuated. This is where the Syrian peaceful revolution began. And no one could believe that it would take this many years before Assad, with the help of Iran, with the help of Hezbollah, with the help of Russia in particular, would be able to completely break it down. But that's exactly what has happened. But the turmoil for the people has not subsided. Libya, still a mess. Slave markets, uncovered by CNN and others just a year ago, looking at the situation with the migrants trying to pass through there. Other countries like Morocco and Tunisia, still struggling to hang on to some unity. And like I said, Egypt back under military control. So we've had this tremendous breakdown in the Middle East. And this goes back, to Trump's summit with Putin when we talk about that international agreement. Russia and Bashar al-Assad have said they want the United States to get out of Syria entirely. Did Trump agree to do that? We don't know. We don't know whether he agreed to do it or not. And we don't know what the future is of Iran there. But in this whole Middle East equation, Iran is the most dangerous point right now.
Why?
Well, because Donald Trump's in trouble, and nothing brings a president's support like a war. And after giving up the Iran deal, the nuclear deal that was arranged with the European countries as well, the JCPOA, after giving all of that up and giving up, our vision inside the Iran nuclear program, there are forces that are at work nonstop right now, trying to completely dismantle any European support for the deal that's left, and trying to dismantle the notion that you can negotiate with Iran. I mean, I don't know how Kim Jong-un gets a missile, gets a bomb, threatens the United States, draws it on a map, and he can pal around with Trump, and get a sweetheart deal out of it. And Iran can't cut a break for anything. Now, I'm not saying Iran hasn't been up to a lot of mischief. They have. But there are forces in the United States who convinced, I think Netanyahu this week was found on videotape saying, I'm the one that convinced Trump to pull out of the deal. But there are also groups like the Foundation for Defense of Democracies that has also lobbied nonstop. And the Israeli government now, and this is a really telling sign, as a journalist, how you open up the New York Times, the Washington Post, and you read a story and you just wonder, where did the journalists get all this information? I mean, this is detailed. This is incredible. Well, an article like that was published in 3 newspapers, the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and New York Times this last week. They were brought in by the Israeli government. I'll tell you how it happens. They spoon-feed the journalists all this information. But it basically pointed to Iran still being a nuclear threat. And this is what you use when you want to build a case for war and conflict.
But who in their right mind, after the fiasco in Afghanistan, after the fiasco in Iraq, after $4 trillion wasted on these nonsensical wars, who in the right mind would go to war with Iraq?
Well, somebody that wanted to deflect away from an investigation of their presidency might want to do that. There are certainly others that see the chaos in the Middle East as just one state incomplete. We heard within the last few weeks that all Iran needs is a little push and it'll go over the edge. Regime change. And we should be very afraid of that. And we should know who are the players that are trying to push that. Because as they move ahead, the chances for peace go way down. We're at a severe risk for that at the present time, in my humble opinion.
Are you worried about a conflict between Iran and Israel?
Israel has already gone to war, if you will, against Iran, but on a very limited scale. They have always they sent emissaries to the United States and tried to appeal to journalists that we should bomb Iran and its nuclear facilities to set them back, they claimed, 10 years. But that's what the JCPOA did. It set them back 10 years, at least. They weren't satisfied with that. And the risk is that if you start airstrikes on their nuclear facilities, what you get yourself into is what we call a lawnmower war. That's a war where you have to go back every 2 years and do it all over again. And there's no guarantee that the other side they're not going to just lie there and take it. They're going to launch their own attacks in different ways. I don't think there would be a conventional confrontation with the United States, but it could, with U.S. troops in Syria, could very easily become that kind of a land war.
I would like to now open the floor if anybody from the audience has any questions for Jim. Can we have the microphone?
Thank you. I want to go back to what you mentioned, that right now you see as a time for revival of journalism, but also the fact that so many media outlets, they are concerned only with making money. How do you see these two things working together?
Well, you raise an excellent point. I think that journalism is looking for different ways of getting funding. A lot of people are trying to go the subscription route, if you will, getting people to help fund them do the right kind of journalism. But then journalists are left making a really substandard salary. And so you're always going to have the mainstream media there. How accountable are they going to be? Are they going to do, are the editors and publishers going to do the job they need to do? Now, reportedly, the world's richest man, Jeff Bezos, now owns the Washington Post. Is he going to let them continue to operate, in an independent fashion? It appears so at this time. But, they were one of the newspapers that, as I noted, that published that whole story trying to indict Iran for its record of pursuing nuclear weapons almost 2 decades ago. A record that since then the IAEA has certified them as giving up. So your question is a good one. How do the investigative journalists of the world get reimbursed for what they're doing? Salome Anderson, the daughter of Terry Anderson, recently published a bit of a rant on social media, just talking about how people wanted her to go into Syria to risk her life to prove to them that she had a story before they would agree to pay her for it. And this is what some journalists face today. It's not an easy road at all. And so long as the mainstream media isn't willing to fund those kinds of projects, and believe me, it sees its expenses are much higher in going in there. And it's hard to convince them to do news, especially when they can focus on Trump and make, dump trucks full of money without ever risking a thing. So that is the challenge. And journalists have to rise to it, but so do media owners.
Anybody else?
I'd like to ask both of you. We as a people tend to surround ourselves with the like-minded people, with the friends that share our ideas. We tend also to read the newspapers that reflect our baseline view of the world. What is the role of the journalists in this? Do you see any way how to break this tendency of people just closing their minds from, reading different stories or reading stories that do not support their view of the world?
Well, let me start. We got 2 great things, right? The internet. It enables us to reach out and get data like we've never been able to do before. That's the good news. The bad news is the internet. It's full of crap and false stories, misinformed stories. It's all out there. It's dependent on every single person in this room and beyond to be valid news consumers, to seek out different points of view. I read North Korea's news site every day. I read Syria's, Bashar al-Assad's news site. I want to know what they're up to. I want to know what they're thinking. I try to get a very, source of the news as I possibly can. And individual newspapers have to reach out, to different columnists to try to present those different views. But ultimately, it is up to the individual to reel in a varied amount of news in order to listen to both sides, to both perspectives. Living in the state of Georgia as I do, if I want to get the Donald Trump supporter view, all I have to do is go to the pub. And it's going to come in both ears. So you do have to talk to your neighbors and not isolate yourself.
I was asked many times if I've ever got any, guidance in CNN how to do news, how to produce news. And yes, I did. And it was tell the truth, be honest. Tell the truth, be honest. That's the mantra I grew up in CNN as a journalist. And for example, I don't have even television anymore. I don't watch news anymore. I don't want to be fed everything that's on there. However, I'm using Twitter, where I very carefully select the people and the networks I want to watch. And it's not just one thing that would support my view of the world. I want to hear what other people has to say. I want to hear what other countries have to say. But I am using sources which I know I can trust. Even if I don't agree with their opinion, I want to be sure that what they say, the facts they are presenting are correct, are not fake, are not made up, are not lies. Anybody else?
Good evening. I just have a little comment about a translation of the word Trump. Doopravdy slovo Trump znamená trumf. Myslím si, že to mnoho lidí neví. Je to zajímavé.
She's just commenting that Trump in the Czech, it's a Trump. It's like a Trump in a...
As it is in English.
Yes.
I mean, a Trump
yes.
card.
Yes,
You know.
yes.
And that's not lost on a lot of people, you know.
Yes, I suppose that's T-R-A-M-P, that's a different meaning.
Yes.
Yes. There was another... Yeah.
Question
Go
down
ahead.
here, third row.
2 days ago, Financial Times featured news on China, on the West region, where they have planned to have a facial recognition cameras in front of every mosque. And it's part of their Sharp Eyes program, where they would install until 2020 facial recognition cameras everywhere, both rural and in cities. How do you perceive this, and do you think it could spread also out of China?
I think it's already spread out of China. I mean, obviously the Chinese government wants to keep track of the Uyghurs, as they're called, that occupy that stretch of China that's kind of like the west coast of the United States, kind of like California. And because they are a Muslim minority in the country, because they have at times had separatist notions, the Chinese want to track them and track them very carefully. But there's also a discussion on killer drones. Technology is posing great opportunities for all of us on the planet, but it's also posing risks. There's increasing moves by people to try to outlaw what they call slaughter bots. Slaughter bots being unmanned drones that make independent decisions based on their own artificial intelligence of who to kill. We have drones today that are controlled from maybe thousands of miles away that make the decision that's based on a human decision. But these slaughter bots are something, and if we can sit here and discuss it, believe me, somebody right now is probably building one. And that's the facial recognition that you talk about, it's there as well. After all, facial recognition is no more than the camera with the software to go with it. And there was a TV series about the whole thing as well. I can't remember the name of it. But, I mean, if the idea is already there, believe me, somebody's building it. And I don't think it's all that new. And I think it's going to get very advanced. And maybe the fundamentals of your question are just how concerned should we be about that? Well, if you're concerned about your privacy, you should be very concerned about it. But you only control that through politics. And you can only trust that as far as your politicians. It could be a tool for good. It could be a tool to bring down crime. It could also be a tool to persecute. And that's the risk that we face with this wonderful technology that we have created ourselves as humans. More questions?
Yes, yeah, there is a couple more, I see.
Can the US come back to so-called normal after Trump?
Oh, sure, I think so. It may take a long time to unravel some of this, but again, I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because I see young people that are willing to stand up to the crisis created by climate change. Just in the past week, I've read articles about forests dying out, baobab trees in Africa that are 4,000 years old, dying. The cedars of Lebanon, dying out, only surviving at higher, cooler altitudes. The trees near Yosemite National Park in the United States, dying out because of years of sustained drought and now insect infestations. And now there's a risk of them all catching fire. When we see our forests burning, when we see our trees dying, I'm reminded of what George Carlin said about plastic bags. He said, you guys were out there saying, oh, save Mother Earth, get rid of plastic bags. And he said, plastic bags, they're not going to choke Mother Earth. They're going to kill us. And that's what it's really about. All of these signs, we're the ones that are endangered by what we're doing. And there's some people that think it's already too late, that we've already, passed that point of no return. We talk about our carbon footprint, but there's really nothing that we can do about it. Well, I say there is. And my youngest daughter, I helped her get a degree in ecology, and she's going to be out there for the next 50, 60 years doing something, hopefully, to change the planet. And everybody's got to have that attitude, that we can do something positive. We can't just all throw up our hands and surrender, I was joking with some of my colleagues that I'm going to be 70 next year. And I'm always impressed by how, the doomsday ministers, the world's going to end. They're all old. The world ends for everybody, but it's one person at a time. But these guys always see it as, it's collective, everybody's going to go with me. It's not the way it is. We go one at a time. And there's no sense being a doomsayer. At the same time, there's no sense underestimating the problem. I think you've got to be positive right up to the point you can't be positive anymore. And that's a long way.
Just to follow up quickly on it, I don't think that people who put Trump in the office made America what it has become in the last 2 centuries. I don't think these are the sort of people who made America a huge country in a sense of sciences, in a sense of education, in a sense of other aspects. So I think, yes, that America has a very huge potential for survival, because it's not what's happening in America is not American at the moment. It's simply not. At the values we know. There was another person there, yes.
With this amount of fake news and all the disinformation that is out there, it's been the video was for a long time for journalists like a last resort kind of thing. So something you can rely on for sure is video. And with current technology, I recently saw that there are already technologies being developed which can manipulate video to such extent that basically you can make any person look like saying anything. And do you think it's gonna, in a few years, can it bring a problem to journalism, some sort of technology like that?
It already has. Look, I don't like the term fake news because there's a truth and there are lies. If it's fake news, then it isn't news, is it? It's really propaganda or disinformation. But fake news has been raised up by all the people who don't like the news, like Donald Trump. He doesn't like criticism, so he calls it fake news. But it's not fake news, and we all know it. And it's this distinction between what is true and what's a lie that's important. Now, when you talk about, the way that video is used or could be used in the future in order to distort people's views, I want to take you all the way back to 1994, Beirut. What was his name? John Testrake was the pilot of the Trans World Airlines flight that was taken hostage in Beirut. And a young man on board posed for a picture with him. He had on a black hood, and he held a gun up to the head of John Testrake. And that picture became an icon that said terror. And it was used, I think, on Time, Newsweek, newspapers, other publications. That was the image. I met John Testrake in Beirut, sat down with him as he was being held as a hostage, and he told me the real story behind this photo with him with a gun at his head. And the story was this, that a young man who had been assigned to guard the crew, because only the crew of the airliner remained on board, the passengers had been taken off and were held elsewhere, saw the TV crew and the photographers coming along the tarmac, and he said, let's pose for a picture. I'll hold the gun to your head, and I'll put on my black hood. And Testrake goes, no, I'm sorry, I can't let you hold a loaded gun to my head. It's just not safe. And so the kid said, I'll empty the magazine. Again, Testrake protested and said, well, there's going to be one in the chamber. And the kid handed him the gun and said, look, no, see, it's there, it's good. Come on, they're coming, let's do it. And he said the young man was so upset that he decided he would go ahead and do it. And so he posed for the picture. It was faked, yes, but it was taken at face value by the rest of the world. The real story was was a kid who wanted media attention, who wanted his picture, you know, in the newspaper or on the cover of a magazine, and he got it. Yes, that was media manipulation, but we've been living with that for a long, long time. That's the true story behind that photo.
Another one?
Good evening, Mr. Clancy. So, the 2020 American presidential election cycle is almost upon us.
Oh, God, please.
So, as you
You're
said,
as bad as CNN. You know, they just finished the election. They said, you know, now we're looking beyond to the next one. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Okay, so as you said today, there's like a deep juxtaposition or like a deep divide in the political views of Americans today, like the ones that deeply disagree with President Trump's like his policies and his actions and his ideology, and the ones who like refuse to disavow him. I don't want you to act as like a fortune teller, but where do you see the next election cycle going?
You know, I think that the American people, a lot of the Trump supporters, would be willing to shift if they could see a real leader with some real ideas emerge, with some solutions. But it depends on more than just the individual. It depends on the party that's behind them. The Democratic Party has shown that it has no creative ideas. It hasn't responded in a really forceful way. At least that's how many Democrats feel. On the other side, the GOP seems to have no one that it would put up to challenge Trump. So it's really going to matter what happens in this Mueller investigation. That's why it's so critical for the United States. It's going to matter what eventually it's proven that President Trump did or didn't do, whether the media is held accountable for the way they behaved, whether the political party, the Republican Party, is held accountable for the way it has continued to support Trump. You know, right up until this Helsinki summit, which apparently Trump has now satisfied them by saying, well, we'll just hold another one in Washington. People are very concerned about that within the Republican establishment, so-called conservatives. But, you know, they weren't troubled by his stand on women. The evangelicals weren't at all upset that his record with his statements on women. People weren't upset with what he did with the children on the border, you know, among these evangelicals that preach love. It's been a lot of people have been revealed as hypocrites in the United States of America. And until they stand up and are held accountable, you know, I wonder how much it's going to change. And I wonder who's going to fill that gap. Somebody creative, I hope.
There was somebody there.
Hello, I want to ask you, what do you think about American presidential election system? Is it fair or not? Because Hillary Clinton, she got 2 million more people, and she was total loser in...
Yeah, that's the Electoral College. That's what the law is today. When the Republicans win the popular vote and lose the electoral vote, they want to change it. And the same happens when the Democrats have that same experience. Will it change? I'm not sure. I think it would be good if it did. The problem with the U.S. electoral law today is not the Electoral College system. It's really the amount of money in politics, the amount of money that it takes to get elected. It's just into the stratosphere now. And only people who have to make trade-offs with the wealthy donors are the only ones who can get elected, it would seem. I mean, we've had a few really incredible cases that are different from that in some of the recent preliminary voting. But the norm today is that you need so much money, you have to sell out before you go to Congress. It used to be that you had to sell out after you went to Congress. Also, we need to have term limits. You know, without term limits, when these guys stay in Washington for 20, 30 years, that's when corruption begins to, you know, dig its roots deeper and deeper into the system. And we really need to look at term limits. The American democracy is still an experiment, but we need to make some more efforts. to try to see what are the solutions here. I, for one, strongly believe in getting money out of politics. I mean, and the Supreme Court has made a decision now that even the darkest of dark money is allowed. The donors don't have to reveal who they are. They can contribute millions to campaigns and never reveal who they are. Now, people raise the question, it could be a foreign government. It doesn't need to be. It can be one interest in the United States that is buying an office as high as the presidency. That's not right. The experiment will go wrong if that's allowed to continue, and we have to fix that. We're only an experiment, though.
We are almost out of time. One last question, if there is one.
Good evening.
Good evening.
You could categorize me as a doomsayer, but I'm not old, I'm young. I would like to talk about something you seem to avoid it, tonight, or maybe it's not as important that it is to me. It's about central bank's monetary policy today. For me, it seems that the Fed and the European central banks are playing a very dangerous games with the quantitative easing that they started years ago. And do you think that if their plans fail, about do you think that it could strengthen the power of Trump in the United States and create a real threat for world stability?
Could you please, I mean, we didn't understand the first part of the question. Who failed?
The central banks, the Fed, and their policy. They started years ago, quantitative easing. So
free money, yeah. And
free money,
the easing. And, well, Donald Trump has already said he doesn't like the idea that they say they're gradually going to increase interest rates. But, that's what powered the stock market up and brought back so much wealth into the stock market in the United States. The sad thing is, about 80% of Americans don't participate in that. And, that's been going on around the world. At one point, it was just called free money. And it's the way that they tried to stimulate the economy to give us a bounce back from the global recession that took place. Everybody has used it, but there's nowhere for them to go now. There's nowhere for them to go but increasing the rates. And that's going to eventually hurt people. The latest I've read is that we still have a few more years at least of low inflation and low interest rates ahead. But how long that will go is anybody's guess. And artificially, tweaking the system like that creates problems. You're right.
Jim, thank you very much for this hour.
Thank you very much.
Especially with your terrible jet lag. I appreciate it.
Thanks to you, Tomasz, and thanks to
you.
all of you. It was great to be here with you, and we'll be around to answer other questions.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.